Thank you, Brenda. That was very, very nice. Renaissance man. Can you think of a better way to say to someone how old they truly are? You know, this guy one time, he saw a sign that said, breakfast anytime. So he goes in and he orders French toast from the Renaissance. So. Okay. See, those who are laughing are showing how smart they are. Yeah, that's right. So this is about state growth and tax policy. And this is all of this data. The first part of this talk, there's two parts, comes from a book recently done with Art LAFFER, Travis Brown, and Steve Moore, and myself, called An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of States, a title that we stole fair and square from Adam Smith. I would suggest you read the book, or you can wait for the movie, either one. So we're going to go through some data here, and then I want to add on to this a partial explanation of why we're seeing what we're seeing, based on the work from Professor Mike Podgorski. And that talk some of you heard, but I think these two work very, very well together. All right, this is a shape of the LAFFER curve. And Art LAFFER, who's been here numerous times, says he loves to visit St. Louis because St. Louis has the largest LAFFER curve in the world. And that is definitely true. And if you read articles about the LAFFER curve, this is exactly the shape that they give. And the trade-off is government revenues on one side and tax rates on the horizontal, on the bottom. And the idea is this: as you raise tax rates up to some point, you will get an increase in government revenues, but you will get them at a diminishing rate. At some point, the whole thing turns over, where you start raising tax rates further and you actually lose revenue. You start collecting less revenue. A very good live example of this is the capital gains tax that was raised by the Democrats and signed by Obama about 2008 or 2009. It went from 15% to 20%, and the total amount of federal revenues from that tax actually fell. So I recall hearing a press conference with Tim Russert, the late great Tim Russert, interviewing then President-elect Obama, and he said, "You want to raise capital gains rates?" He said, "Yes." And this is Tim Russert's a Democrat asking this question. He says, "Aren't you aware of studies that show if you actually raise the rate, you'll start bringing in less revenues rather than more?" And his answer was, "I don't care." You know, so this is a statement of someone who has a passionate belief or addiction in central government, regardless of the effect of the fiscal policies they propose. And the idea here is if you had a zero tax rate, you'd have zero government revenue. If you have a 100% tax rate, you're going to have zero government revenue because no one will work. So you want to find the spot in between that sort of maximizes the growth of the economy, of GDP, say. This pretty much is the story. You can probably just leave right after this, but this compares, this is looking at, we're going to take the 9 states with the lowest, happens to be zero taxes, personal income taxes, and the 9 states with the highest personal income tax. Over this particular period of time, it's more than 10 years, 97 to 2014. And we also put in here, just to make you feel real badly, the state of Missouri. So the gross state product growth, that's the state version of GDP, for the 9 states with no income tax grew at 51. The U.S. average state grew at 42, 9 percentage points less. Missouri was 19, a paltry 19. And you're going to hear more of this, and it's going to really upset you. And in the 9 states with the highest personal income tax rate, we're way below the growth of the states with no income tax. Population growth was the same story. Here are the no income tax states at 26, the highest states with 12%, national average 17, and good old Missouri at 11. Bringing up the rear. Non-farm payroll growth was exactly the same thing, 24 for no income tax, 12 for the highest income tax, 13 for the nation, and 4 for Missouri. And total state tax receipts. This one is sort of the bottom line killer, because your leftist friends will say we have to raise taxes or have them so that we can provide social services. So to provide more social services, you need growth in government revenues. But what we see is that the growth in government revenues over this period for the 9 highest income tax states at 118%, is basically the same or slightly more than the growth in revenues for the highest tax states. So if you're not going to get growth in revenues from having personal income taxes, why have them? Here's the average, and here's good old Missouri. Okay, an anecdotal version of this is Missouri and Tennessee. Tennessee threw out its income tax, or rather its Supreme Court threw out its income tax in 1947. And at that time, Missouri was bigger than Tennessee by every economic measure we have. But in the ensuing period, because Tennessee had no income tax and Missouri did, we can see what happened. Tennessee eclipsed us here, fell back a bit, and then now continues to grow very far apart, very much faster than the state of Missouri. Here we're going to look at surrounding states, sort of gilding the lily here. This is real GDP performance versus our neighboring states. As you can see, all too clearly, Missouri is last than all of these states. This is employment growth versus the neighboring states. And Missouri is second last. But give us time. Now here's another sample or version or effect of these differences in tax policy. This one really hits home. Some of you may have experienced this personally. This is the amount of net migration. This is migration of, in this case, it is people moving out of high tax states and moving into no tax states. So you can see that the no income tax states right here, $200 billion of adjusted gross income moved into those states. Leaving the high tax states was $163 billion, which just means that some of it went elsewhere. But most of it goes into the states with no income taxes. The two biggest culprits, of course, are Florida and Texas, but Tennessee doesn't have an income tax. And Kansas will be getting there. They don't have any income tax now on small and medium-sized businesses, which was something imposed just a few years ago, which I think is going to be a killer tax. It's already having effects. We're already seeing substantial numbers of businesses move to Kansas City, Kansas. It was about 8 or 9 months ago, maybe a year ago, we had Sam Brown back here for one of these morning breakfast talks. As we were walking toward the podium, he said to me, he says, "Rex, you're not going to believe the number of new business filings that we are seeing in Kansas City, Kansas." And I said, "Unfortunately, Governor, I think I would believe it, and I can probably imagine it." And it is massive. Kansas City, Missouri is target zero for that tax change because companies just have to move 1 or 2 or 3 blocks and they're in a no income tax state for their business taxes, like S-Corps, LLCs, pass-through entities. So Kansas City, Missouri is first. St. Louis, Missouri is second, and it's coming. Now these are social services, full-time equivalent employees per 10,000 residents. This is a way of estimating how much services each of these different states have, like police, fire, hospitals, taking care of prisons, highways, etc. And the bottom line here is, you look across the very high tax states to the no tax states, and there's no difference anywhere. I mean, in fact, the bluest line, the blue line is Missouri. The no income tax states are this orange or goldish line. In many cases it's higher, but basically the story is there's no benefit, there's no economic benefit from having high tax rates in terms of social services. And this is probably the number one argument you're going to get. We need more taxes, we need to raise taxes, we need to keep taxes so we can provide services to our citizens in need. That's well and good, but high taxes don't do it. And they do have many adverse consequences. So if you get no gain and you get a lot of harm and punishment, why have them? Now this is social services average annual employee salary. And this one probably will not surprise you. The states that have the highest income taxes also pay the most for public servants. These are the green bars. In every case, they pay more for every category of state employee than the no income tax states or Missouri. This is social services giving other measures, measuring the effect of MoDOT, say transportation. And by the way, Missouri has an excellent department. MoDOT has been ahead of the curve, for example, in advocating for public-private partnerships for 20 years. And we're not going to get big changes in infrastructure, particularly Highway 70, until we get a public-private partnership. Those have been used all over the world very successfully. But, you know, so you can see the cost per highway, Missouri stacks up rather well. And the number of our roads in bad condition, we're one of the very lowest. So in that regard, in terms of our infrastructure, Missouri compares favorably to almost everyone. Here's another story, a real story of the LAFFER curve effect. Art came in to advise Governor Pete DuPont in Delaware in 1977 when, if you can believe it, their top state income tax rate was 19.8%. Today, the highest in the nation is California at 13%. It's hard to believe that any state actually tried this. But what they did is they started taking this rate down systematically, falling like this to near 6.5%. And look what happens to government revenues. They're going out of sight. It's a perfect illustration of the LAFFER curve. And of course, the reason is people see taxes coming down. They otherwise like to live there. Now they have a reason to stay there. They're not going to engage in the migration that many other people do. This is another wonderful argument. It's one of my favorites. We're looking at what happens to states that don't have income taxes, but let's look at states who didn't have an income tax and then imposed one. So we got a before and after experiment. So what we're looking at is the 11 states from 1962 on that did not have an income tax and then imposed one. And this is remarkable. Okay, here are the growth, a share of total GDP for the 11 states at one point that didn't have an income tax before that time, before the imposition of the tax. Their share of the U.S. GDP was 33%. They were 1/3 of the economy. Then we imposed the tax starting in 62 on, and the states are listed down there. And they fell, their role fell to almost 22%, almost 1/5 of the economy, a massive decline after imposition of those taxes. The same thing happened to their population growth. And the same thing happened to their share of state revenues. Their share actually fell considerably. That's the story so far. Now what we want to look at is, why is Missouri so bad? You know, we're near the bottom in almost every category that you'd like to be average or near the top. This comes from a paper by Professor Mike Podgorski, and some of you may have heard this before. But here he's looking at the average annual GDP growth from 01 to 14, and he's ranked all of the states. They're all here somewhere. And look at the winner over this period, North Dakota. I mean, it's amazing. Of course, we know what's happening there, oil, of course, and shale, and a lot of it. But here's Missouri, way down here. We're 6 from the bottom, you know, and we know the solution, but over this period of time, over the last 8 years, this current governor never proposed a pro-growth policy, not once. The General Assembly actually passed a tax cut, which would have helped us, and he vetoed it. I mean, it's really a perverse action. Fortunately, the General Assembly was able to override it, and these tax cuts will kick in starting next year. Now, this looks at the same kind of thing, both pre-recession and post-recession, 2008. On the horizontal, you have the average annual growth of each state from 2008 to 2014, and here you, across the horizontal, this was the vertical, I mean, horizontal here, 01 to 08. And here's Missouri plots here. We're in the lower left quadrant, the one place you don't want to be. We're there in both periods. Okay, this looks now at the metro areas in the state of Missouri. Large metro areas like Kansas City and St. Louis, small metro areas as those listed here, and shows their growth rates over this period. Okay, here's the entire state. Here is Kansas City and St. Louis together. We are dreadful. In the second period, it improves a bit, but we're still last. We're last here, we're last there. The small metro areas are doing comparatively well. And then the rural areas are certainly better than St. Louis and Kansas City. In fact, I think if you formed a new state, you took St. Louis and Kansas City and made them the 51st state, I believe that we would rank 51 out of 51 in terms of growth. So what's holding the state growth back is the growth of its two engines, St. Louis and Kansas City. Collectively, they account for 60 to 70% of the GDP of the entire state. And so there's anything we can do to make those cities move and grow, we should do. Now keep in mind, what distinguishes them from all other cities in Missouri is they both have an additional 1% income tax called the earnings tax. And I don't know, well, there are other papers that illustrate the effect of this, papers by Haslag and then later Howard Wall, who have looked at the effect of earnings taxes across the nation. And there's just no exception to the fact that a local income tax is a killer. Here we're looking at the growth rates of these states with some regions thrown in as if they are pseudo-states. And you remember that this was Missouri here, just like on the other chart, but St. Louis and Kansas City, no, we're not last, we're second last, pulling the whole state down. So the contribution to Missouri's growth in quotes, from St. Louis and Kansas City is truly horrible. Okay, that's the conclusions. And basically over here states the point again, if the mere existence of an income tax doesn't provide extra revenues relative to no tax, why have it? It's just purely punitive, it seems. And that was it.
Rex will be here for a few minutes if you have some additional questions for him. I do need to reiterate that the Show Me Institute is a nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse parties or candidates. So thank you all for coming, and there's probably more coffee and donuts in the back.